Hello everybody. This is part 2 of animal rights, welfare and legislation. Today I've got 3 different topics that I'm going to cover. The first one will be animal fights and legislation thereof. The second one would be injuries caused by animals and the legislation thereof. And then the third one would be just the proposed legislation for assistant animals. If you only wish to listen to one particular subject, please follow my timeline and you will be able to just hop straight into that subject matter. So let's dive into the first chapter, that of animal fights. So amendment to the Animal Protection Act 1962 was made to include legislation regarding dog fights and everything that's associated with this particular matter, and it's called the Animal Matters Amendment Act 42 of 1993. So section 2A1 authorizes any magistrate's court the right to impose penalties to persons pertaining to the following matters. So persons that the legislation pertains to. The first one, any person having an animal held, leased, owned, imported, sold, trained, or bred for the purpose of animal fighting. The next person, that instigates or causes animal fights or attacks. Any person that promotes animal fights for the amusement or betting thereof. Any person that allows animal fights on property that they own, lease, or are in charge of. Any person that possesses, utilizes, or are in charge of any property that is fully or partially involved in animal fighting. And this includes, this is where it just takes it one step further, this includes those that collaborate and obey in the supervision or giving admission to spectators to this property where these animal fights are being held. And then lastly, of course, the spectators will also, on conviction, will be deemed guilty of an offense and be subjected to a fine up to 80,000 rands or imprisonment of no longer than 24 months. Sadly, there has been cases where beloved pets have been stolen and pitted against each other for these animal fights. And all it does is it just adds to the bad reputation that pit bulls already have. Chapter 2, let's dive into injuries caused by animals. So dog bites is the most common injury, but it can be both domestic or non-domestic. Animals can cause people harm. So let's look at the legislation thereof. Any negligent person whose animal causes harm to another person shall be, on conviction, deemed guilty of the offense and subject to a fine or imprisonment of no longer than 24 months. In addition, the courts can make further demands. Now let's look at these further demands. The first one, the animal in question can be ordered to be removed, surrendered, or euthanized, and the cost thereof will be for the offender's bill. The second one, should a declaration have been issued to an offender that the courts deem the offender unfit to own, have in their care, or have any authority over a specific type of animal or breed for a defined time period. Then, should a death result due to an animal attack, whether it was negligent or there was a deliberate intention to do so, the Act authorizes the courts to make the necessary alterations in sentencing whilst allowing the main point of issue not to be affected. Societies such as the NSPCA can be allocated sufficient funds from the government to execute the functions of removal, care, or euthanasia of such animals. So just going back to the declaration, there is some requirements that to that declaration that the courts will issue. Should an offender be issued a declaration of a defined period of time not to own or have such an animal in their care, they get given a time period of 14 days from the date of declaration to make alternative arrangements. Should the offender not have done so, they would be deemed to be in contravention of that defined period of time, and again they could be subjected to a fine or imprisonment of no longer than 12 months. The magistrates court have the jurisdiction to sentence the offenders accordingly. The third chapter, the proposed new legislation for assistant animals. Even though Section 9 of the Constitution affords every single citizen in South Africa equality under the Act, and that includes people with disability, and all of us are protected against discrimination, a further call was made to make an amendment to the current Performing Animals Protection Act of 1935. The emphasis has been placed on the licensing system to legitimize people with disabilities whilst using assistant animals. The aim of this will be to better protect the disabled and their service animals, as it provides the necessary proof that they have the right to enter any public or private spaces, facilities, or use transport. In addition, a proposal has been made that any person that hinders or obstructs the disabled, accompanied by their licensed assistant animal, will be committing an offense, and that offender will be held liable by either being fined or imprisoned. So this is still a proposal stage, and a call has been made for all interested parties to write and comment on the subject matter. So you can send the email to this address, but please do copy this address in on that email and let your voice be heard.